Prince Philip gave up a throne, a country, a church, and eventually even the surname he expected his children to carry. But the most painful part may have happened only weeks after Elizabeth became queen, when a private family question was suddenly taken out of their marriage and placed in the hands of the government. What followed was not one dramatic argument, but a chain of decisions that repeatedly reminded Philip who actually held the power. Today, we're going through the story step by step and why Princess Anne's perspective makes it even more revealing. Subscribe for more untold royal stories. Long before Philip became the Queen's husband, his childhood had already taken away much of the stability most people take for granted. His father had effectively disappeared from his daily life, while his mother, Princess Alice, had spent years dealing with serious personal difficulties. His 4 sisters eventually lived in Germany after marriage, and the family's former royal position had collapsed. Philip moved between relatives and schools, carrying little more than a trunk, a bicycle, and constantly changing addresses. When Elizabeth began writing to him, their relationship offered something he had rarely possessed before: the possibility of a permanent home. Then came a tragedy that Philip carried for the rest of his life. In 1937, his sister Cecily died in an aircraft crash near Ostend, Belgium, along with her husband and 2 young sons. Philip was only 16 when he attended the funeral in Germany. The images from that procession later became a disturbing part of the story because some of the uniforms surrounding his sister's coffin were connected to the political world of Nazi Germany. Philip had not chosen his sister's marriages or their associations. Yet when his own marriage to Elizabeth was later considered, those family connections became part of the background surrounding him. Philip's own wartime record was very different from the political associations surrounding some of his relatives. He served with the Royal Navy throughout the Second World War and was involved in major operations, including the Battle of Cape Matapan and the Japanese surrender in Tokyo Bay. But when his relationship with Elizabeth moved toward marriage, his military achievements did not erase the complicated family photographs following him. Instead, Philip was asked to make major personal changes before he could become Elizabeth's husband. He surrendered his Greek and Danish royal titles, gave up his position in the Greek succession, converted to Anglicanism, became British, and adopted the Mountbatten name. After the wedding, Philip expected to have some influence over the home he would share with Elizabeth. But once she became queen in 1952, even the question of where they would live became a struggle. Philip reportedly argued strongly against moving into Buckingham Palace, describing it as an enormous institutional building rather than a comfortable family home for 2 young children. He preferred Clarence House, which had already been made suitable for family life. But the decision was eventually made for them. In May 1952, they moved into Buckingham Palace, while Elizabeth's mother moved into Clarence House, the very residence Philip had worked to make habitable. The problem was larger than one residence. Philip increasingly found himself surrounded by courtiers who had served Elizabeth's father and grandfather before him. Many reportedly regarded the Duke of Edinburgh as a young man with modern ideas who would eventually accept the established system. Philip did not simply accept it. Over the years, he pushed for changes involving kitchens, accounts, ceremonies, and other aspects of royal administration. Yet the palace remained fundamentally Elizabeth's inherited institution. Philip could influence parts of it, but he never controlled it. That distinction became crucial when an apparently simple question about the family surname suddenly became a constitutional issue. One of the most important people in Philip's story was his uncle, Louis Mountbatten. Mountbatten had spent years helping rebuild the family's position, and he played a major role in guiding Philip toward his future with Elizabeth. After the accession, a dinner was held at Broadlands, Mountbatten's Hampshire home. According to the source, Mountbatten publicly suggested that the House of Mountbatten now reigned. The comment reportedly traveled quickly through royal circles and eventually reached Queen Mary. For Philip's ambitious uncle, the statement may have sounded like a triumph. Inside the older generation of the monarchy, however, it created immediate alarm. Queen Mary had lived through an earlier royal identity crisis. In 1917, during the First World War, her husband George V changed the family name from Saxe-Coburg and Gotha to Windsor because of the hostility toward German connections. By 1952, she was an elderly woman who had personally witnessed how dangerous a royal family name could become politically. So when Mountbatten's comment reached her, she reportedly reacted strongly. The matter did not remain a private family disagreement. Her private secretary communicated with Churchill's private secretary, and the issue moved toward the government. Philip's surname was no longer simply a discussion between husband and wife. That change in scale is what made the situation so extraordinary. In an ordinary family, a husband and wife would normally decide what surname their children should use. Philip believed the traditional arrangement meant his children would carry his surname. Charles was 3 and Anne was only 18 months old. But the monarchy was not operating like an ordinary household. The government became involved, and Philip was reportedly not consulted directly about the decision being prepared. On April 9, 1952, Elizabeth made a formal declaration in council establishing Windsor as the name of the royal house and family. The decision was now official. The declaration meant something particularly painful for Philip. Charles and Anne would remain Windsor. The man who had already surrendered his titles, nationality, religion, and previous identity could not simply pass Mountbatten to the children he had with Elizabeth. According to the source, Philip was deeply frustrated by the decision. What makes the episode so powerful is that his personal disagreement had effectively been removed from the marriage and converted into an institutional matter. Elizabeth had signed the declaration as sovereign, while Philip had no comparable constitutional authority. His personal identity had once again collided with the machinery of the crown. The tension did not disappear with the surname decision. In 1956, Philip left Britain aboard the royal yacht for a long Commonwealth tour that lasted 4 months. During his absence, newspapers began speculating about trouble between him and Elizabeth. Rumors of a palace, rift, and separate lives spread rapidly. Then, Buckingham Palace did something highly unusual. In February 1957, the palace press office issued a formal denial that there was any rift between the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh. The source emphasizes how unusual that was because the palace normally avoided confirming or denying personal stories. Their marriage had suddenly become a public subject. 3 years later, another important change finally appeared. On February 8, 1960, Elizabeth issued an order in council declaring that descendants without royal styles would use the surname Mountbatten Windsor. The timing was significant, but the change had limits. Charles and Anne, the 2 children whose surnames had been at the center of the original dispute, were not covered by the new arrangement. They remained Windsor. Philip had finally secured a formal place for his family name within the royal family, but he had not received the outcome he originally wanted for his first 2 children. The compromise came years after the original conflict. Then came the moment that could be viewed as Philip's most personal victory. On November 14, 1973, Princess Anne married Mark Phillips at Westminster Abbey. When she signed the marriage register, she used the name Anne Mountbatten Windsor. Philip was nearby, watching his daughter publicly place his family name on a legal document. The significance was enormous because the surname that had once been excluded from Charles and Anne's identities had finally appeared through Anne's own decision. Decades after the original argument, Mountbatten was visible inside the royal family. It was not the victory Philip had originally sought, but it was still a remarkable acknowledgement of his identity. Years later, Philip found himself watching another outsider enter the same institution. Diana Spencer married Charles in 1981, becoming part of the royal family that Philip had spent decades learning to navigate. When Diana's marriage began falling apart publicly, Philip reportedly wrote to her. The letters were described as lengthy and thoughtful, very different from the image of Philip as simply a blunt and difficult old sailor. Their correspondence was not always gentle, especially when Diana's choices affected Charles. But Philip understood something she was experiencing that few others could, entering the royal family from outside and discovering how little room the institution sometimes left for personal identity. The final chapter makes the entire story feel different. In 1997, after Diana's death, Philip reportedly helped William through the decision about whether the young princes should walk behind their mother's coffin. He offered to walk alongside William so the teenager would not face the procession alone. Decades later, at 96, Philip retired because he wanted somewhere quiet where nobody was constantly watching him. Princess Anne later rejected the idea that he retired out of spite toward Elizabeth. Perhaps that is the real story, not a marriage destroyed by one argument, but a lifetime of sacrifice, compromise, and adaptation. Do you think Philip ever truly forgave the decision that took Mountbatten away from his children? Tell me below, and subscribe for more royal stories.